John Miller sat in his small apartment on a Tuesday evening. He was tired after a long day of work at the hardware store. The only thing he wanted to do was relax on his worn-out couch and watch some TV. He grabbed the remote and turned on his television, flipping through channels until something caught his eye. The popular streaming platform Airthum was showing a live interview with Clint Eastwood. John liked Clint Eastwood's movies, especially the old westerns. He put down the remote and settled in to watch. The interview seemed normal at first. Susan Green, a well-known talk show host with perfect hair and a bright smile, sat across from the legendary actor and director. Studio had soft lighting, and the camera showed both of them sitting in comfortable chairs. Susan was asking Clint about his newest movie project. "Mr. Eastwood, at your age, many directors would have retired. What keeps you making films?" Susan asked with genuine interest. Clint Eastwood, looking strong despite his years, leaned forward slightly. "Well, Susan, I've always believed that he..." Never finished his sentence. 3 people in police uniforms walked onto the set. The camera operator seemed confused and zoomed out to show the whole scene. The studio audience went silent. Even Susan looked surprised. One of the officers, a tall man with a serious face, approached Clint Eastwood. "Sir, I need you to stand." "Up, please," he said firmly. Clint Eastwood looked confused, but did as he was asked. The officer continued, "Clint Eastwood, you are under arrest in connection with a case from 1972. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." The officer read him his rights. Another officer took out handcuffs. The metal cuffs made a clicking sound as they closed around Clint Eastwood's wrists. The third officer stood by the exit, watching carefully. Susan Green stood up. "What's happening? There must be some mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, please step back," the tall officer said. "This is official police business." Camera kept rolling. Millions of people across America, just like John, watched in shock as one of Hollywood's biggest stars was being arrested on live TV. John couldn't believe what he was seeing. He grabbed his phone to see if anyone else was talking about this. His social media feed was already exploding with posts about the arrest. Some people thought it was a prank, or maybe a scene from a movie, but it looked too real to be fake. Broadcast suddenly cut to a commercial about laundry detergent. John barely noticed the cheerful jingle as his mind raced with questions. What had Clint Eastwood done?
Oh.
Why arrest him during a live show? Was this somehow planned? When the commercial ended, a nervous-looking man appeared on screen. "We apologize for the interruption in our scheduled programming. We are trying to gather more information about what just happened during our interview with Mr. Eastwood. We will update you as soon as we know more." John's phone rang. It was his friend Mike. "You watching this?" Mike asked without saying hello. "Yeah, I saw the whole thing," John replied. "Do you think it's real?" "It has to be. They wouldn't interrupt a live show like that for a joke," Mike said. "But Clint Eastwood? He's like 90 years old. What could he have done?" He said something about 1972, John remembered. That's over 50 years ago. While John and Mike talked, the news was spreading fast. The video clip of the arrest was already being shared millions of times online. News channels interrupted their regular shows to report on what happened. Lisa Garcia, a nurse who lived next door to John, knocked on his door. When he opened it, she was holding her tablet. "Did you see what happened to Clint Eastwood?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I was watching it live," John said. "Come in." Lisa sat on the couch next to John. She showed him her tablet. "People are going crazy online. Look at all these theories." John scrolled through the comments. Some people were saying Clint must have killed someone. Others said it was all a publicity stunt for a new movie. A few even claimed it was a political move to distract from something else. "We shouldn't jump to conclusions," John said. "We don't know anything yet." The local news came on at 10 p.m. The main story, of course, was Clint Eastwood's arrest. The news anchor, a man named Robert Lee, looked serious as he reported. In shocking news tonight, actor and director Clint Eastwood was arrested during a live interview on Airthum. Police took him into custody in connection with a cold case from 1972. "We have very few details at this time. but our sources say it involves the disappearance of someone who worked on one of his early Western films. They showed the clip of the arrest again. John noticed something he had missed before. Clint Eastwood looked surprised at first, but then his face became calm. It's almost like he had expected this day to come. The phone lines at all the major news stations were ringing nonstop. People wanted to know more. Reporters were trying to get any information they could. By midnight, the first statement from Clint Eastwood's family came out. His daughter Mary spoke briefly to reporters outside her home in California. "My father is innocent of any wrongdoing," she said, her voice strong despite the late hour. "This is a terrible mistake, and we are working to resolve it quickly. We ask for privacy during this difficult time." Police were not saying much, it confirmed the arrest, but gave no details about the case. This made people even more curious. John stayed up late reading everything he could find online. He found an old article about a missing person named Frank Collins, who had worked as a production assistant on one of Eastwood's films in the early 1970s. The article was from a small newspaper and didn't mention Eastwood as a suspect. But now, people were connecting the dots, as John finally went to bed around 2 a.m. More than 15 million people had seen the arrest either live or in clips online. It was all anyone would talk about tomorrow. The next morning, John woke up to even more news. He turned on his TV while making coffee. Every channel was talking about Clint Eastwood. A reporter stood outside the police station where Eastwood had spent the night. Sources tell us that Mr. Eastwood will appear before a judge this morning for his bail hearing. Security is tight, and a crowd of both supporters and curious onlookers has already gathered. The camera showed people holding signs that said "Free Clint and innocent until proven guilty." Others just wanted to see the famous actor in person. John called in sick to work. He knew his boss wouldn't be happy, but he couldn't focus on hardware store problems today, not when something this big was happening. He sat down with his coffee and watched as America woke up to the news that one of its biggest movie stars was in jail. No one knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning of a story that would captivate the nation for weeks to come. By evening, the news of Clint Eastwood's arrest was on every TV channel, website, and radio station. John Miller had been glued to his television all day. He even ordered pizza delivery so he wouldn't miss anything important. The courthouse where Eastwood's bail hearing took place was surrounded by reporters and fans. Police officers formed a line to keep people back. Camera flashes lit up the area like lightning as a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up when Clint Eastwood stepped out of the vehicle. He looked smaller than he did in his movies. He wore a simple gray suit instead of his usual Western clothes. Two lawyers walked beside him. One was tall with gray hair, and the other was shorter with glasses. They moved quickly toward the courthouse doors. "Mr. Eastwood, did you do it?" a reporter shouted. "Are you innocent?" yelled another. Eastwood did not answer any questions. His face showed no emotion as he walked past the crowd. Inside the courtroom, Judge Linda Martinez looked at the famous actor sitting at the defense table. The room was quiet except for the sound of a camera clicking. "Bail is set at $1 million, Judge Martinez announced. Her voice was firm.
Oh.
The defendant must surrender his passport and cannot leave the state. Eastwood's lawyer, Paul White, stood up. "Your Honor, my client has deep ties to the community. He is not a flight risk. We request a lower bail amount." The judge shook her head. "The request is denied." Next case. Within an hour, Eastwood was released after his family paid the bail. He walked out of the courthouse with his lawyers.
Is this
Time. He stopped briefly to make a short statement. "I am innocent of these charges," he said in his famous raspy voice. "I trust the justice system will clear my name. That's all I have to say for now." Back in his apartment, John watched all this on TV. He opened his laptop to search for more information about the case. News websites were reporting that Eastwood had been arrested in connection with the disappearance of Frank Collins, a production assistant who went missing in 1972 during the filming of one of Eastwood's early westerns. A special news report came. On TV, Nancy Taylor, a reporter known for covering Hollywood stories, appeared on screen. "I have obtained documents from sources close to the investigation," she said, holding up some papers. According to these documents, police have reopened the case of Frank Collins based on new evidence. Collins was last seen on the set of Gunfight at Red Rock, a Western film directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. The screen showed an old black and white photo of a young man with a friendly smile. Below the picture were the words Frank Collins, 1948 to 1972. Nancy continued, Collins was 24 years old when he disappeared. His body was never found. The case went cold after a few months of investigation. But now, police say they have new evidence linking Eastwood to the disappearance. The TV showed a press conference where Detective Alan Brown stood at a podium with microphones. We are following new evidence that recently came to our attention. Detective Brown said, he was a serious-looking man with a mustache. I cannot share specific details as this is an ongoing investigation. Mr. Eastwood is cooperating with authorities. That's all I can say at this time. John's phone rang. It was his friend Mike again. This is crazy, Mike said. Do you think he really did it? I don't know, John replied. It happened so long ago. Why would they arrest him now, after all these years? They said they have new evidence, Mike reminded him. Yeah, but what kind of evidence shows up after 50 years? John wondered. Their conversation was interrupted by breaking news. Paul White, Eastwood's attorney, was giving a statement outside his office building. My client is completely innocent, White said to the reporters gathered around him.
Oh.
This arrest was a shameful publicity stunt.
Oh.
The police could have handled this matter privately, but instead chose to humiliate Mr. Eastwood on national television.
Owie.
We will fight these baseless charges, and we are confident the truth will prevail. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. White, what about the new evidence the police mentioned? We've not been shown any credible evidence, White answered. But we look forward to examining it in court, where facts matter more than sensational headlines. The next day, a woman named Laura Phillips appeared on several morning news shows. She was in her 70s with short white hair. The caption under her name said she was a retired set designer who had worked with Eastwood in the 1970s. I worked on 3 films with Clint, she told the morning show host. Was always professional and kind to everyone on set. This doesn't make any sense. Did you know Frank Collins? The host asked. Yes, I remember him, Laura said. He was a quiet young man. He's very eager to learn the film business. Everyone was shocked when he disappeared. Was there any tension between Collins and Eastwood? The host pressed. Laura shook her head firmly. Not that I ever saw. Clint treated the crew with respect. He wasn't one of those demanding, difficult directors you hear about. As days passed, more people from Eastwood's past came forward. Some supported him, while others hinted they had seen troubling behavior. A man named Steve Harris, who had been a camera operator on Gunfight at Red Rock, gave an interview claiming he had seen Eastwood arguing with Collins the day before the young man disappeared. They were behind one of the trailers, Harris said. Eastwood was angry about something. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but he was pointing his finger in Collins' face. John found himself getting more and more interested in the case. He started a folder on his computer where he saved articles and videos about it, even made a timeline of events based on what was being reported. Social media was divided.
Awesome.
People believed Eastwood was guilty, while others thought he was being framed. Hashtags like #FreeClint and #JusticeForFrank were trending. A group of protesters gathered outside Eastwood's home in California. They held signs with pictures of Frank Collins. The leader of the group, a woman in her 30s named Diane Foster, spoke to news cameras. We are here to make sure Frank Collins is not forgotten again, she said. Just because someone is famous doesn't mean they should be above the law. Counter-protesters soon showed up as well. They held signs supporting Eastwood. The two groups faced each other across the street while police stood between them. Meanwhile, true crime blogger named Kevin Jones published a long analysis of the case. He had studied Eastwood's filming schedule from 1972 and found that there was a 3-day gap when production was paused due to technical difficulties. This gap started the day after Collins disappeared. Why would filming stop right after a crew member went missing? Kevin wrote in his blog. Why did no one mention this pause during the original investigation? The blog post received millions of views and was discussed on TV news shows. Some called it compelling evidence, while others said it was just wild speculation. As the second week after the arrest began, Eastwood's daughter Mary appeared on a morning show. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "My father has entertained people for over 60 years, she said, her voice breaking. "He's devoted his life to making films that people love. And this is how they repay him? With baseless accusations about something that supposedly happened before I was even born?" The host offered her a tissue. "This must be very difficult for your family," Mary nodded. "It's a nightmare. Dad is in his 90s. He should be enjoying his final years, not fighting to clear his name from horrible lies." John Miller watched all this with growing fascination. The story had more twists and turns than any movie he had ever seen. And unlike a movie, no one knew how it would end. As days passed, America became more and more divided over the Clint Eastwood case. John Miller found himself thinking about it constantly. At work in the hardware store, customers talked about little else. Some thought Eastwood was guilty, while others believed he was innocent. "No way Clint did it," said Bob, an older man buying paint. "He's a good American. They're just trying to bring him down." "Famous people aren't above the law," argued a woman in line behind him. "If he killed that young man, he should pay for it. No matter how many good movies he made." John didn't share his own thoughts. He wasn't sure what to believe yet. He wanted to see more evidence before making up his mind. The morning news shows were full of experts giving their opinions. One former police officer named Sam Wilson appeared on several channels. "The fact that they arrested him on live TV tells me they have solid evidence," Wilson said. "Police don't take such public actions without being very sure." But a famous defense lawyer named Carol Davis disagreed. "This was a publicity stunt by a police department desperate to solve a cold case," she said. "They're hoping public pressure will make up for their lack of real evidence." Outside the courthouse, where Eastwood would eventually stand trial, two groups formed every day. On one side, supporters held signs saying, "Innocent until proven guilty, and we stand with Clint." On the other side, people demanded justice for Frank Collins, the missing production assistant. Sometimes the two groups shouted at each other. Police officers stood between them to prevent fighting. News cameras filmed everything, and reporters interviewed people from both sides. On the third day after Eastwood's arrest, something unexpected happened. One of the officers who had arrested Eastwood on the Airthum show was put on leave. Her name was Judy Martinez. The police department said they were investigating her for improper conduct related to a high-profile arrest. That evening, the Airthum network announced that Officer Martinez had told their producers about the planned arrest before it happened. An email was leaked showing that Martinez had written, "Make sure your cameras are rolling for the full hour. Something big will happen during the Eastwood interview." This news made many people question whether the arrest was really necessary during a live broadcast. Even people who thought Eastwood might be guilty wondered if the police had gone too far. Eastwood's lawyer, Paul White, held another press conference. "This confirms what we've been saying all along," he said, holding up a copy of the leaked email. "This arrest was staged for maximum public impact. It was designed to embarrass my client and turn public opinion against him before a single piece of evidence was presented in court." On social media, hashtags like #StagedArrest and #PoliceTheater started trending. People posted video clips analyzing every detail of the arrest, looking for signs that it had been planned for television. John watched all this with growing interest. It started a notebook where he wrote down key facts and questions about the case. The notebook was filling up quickly. On a rainy Friday evening, John's doorbell rang. It was his neighbor, Lisa Garcia. She held a pizza box and a folder full of papers. "I brought dinner and research," she said with a smile. "I've been collecting articles about the original disappearance of Frank Collins." John let her in. They sat at his small kitchen table and spread out the papers while eating pizza. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to an old newspaper article. Collins was last seen leaving the film's set on June 12, 1972. But there's no mention of any argument with Eastwood. In fact, the original investigation focused on a local man who had threatened several people working on the film. John looked at the article closely. "What happened to this local man?" "That's the interesting part," Lisa said. "He moved away right after Collins disappeared. The police questioned him but didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. So why aren't they looking at him now instead of Eastwood? John wondered. Lisa shrugged. Maybe he's dead. Or maybe this new evidence they claim to have really does point to Eastwood. They spent hours going through the articles and making notes. It felt good to talk about the case with someone who was as interested as he was. The next morning, a new development shocked everyone. George Smith, a man who had worked as a stunt double on Eastwood's films in the 1970s, came forward claiming he had seen Eastwood and Collins in a heated argument on the day Collins disappeared. Collins was threatening to go to the press with some story, Smith told reporters. Eastwood told him, "You'll regret it if you do. I didn't think much of it back then. But now I wonder if it meant something more." Smith's statement made the news everywhere. Many people saw it as proof that Eastwood was guilty, but others questioned why Smith had waited 50 years to share this information. Eastwood's daughter Mary appeared on TV again, this time looking angry instead of sad. "Mr. Smith is lying," she said firmly. "He's using my father's situation to get his 15 minutes of fame. Dad barely remembers this person, and there's a reason for that. He was only on set for 2 days." The district attorney handling the case, Richard Bell, gave a short statement to the press. "We are building a solid case based on both old and new evidence," he said. "Justice delayed does not mean justice denied. We believe Mr. Collins' family deserves answers after all these years." A reporter asked if the case was strong enough to get a conviction. Bell smiled confidently. "Have approved the arrest if I didn't believe we could prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." Some people noticed that Bell was running for a higher office in the upcoming election. This made them wonder if he was using the high-profile case to boost his campaign. Meanwhile, a small group of journalists started investigating Officer Judy Martinez, who had tipped off the Airthum producers. They discovered that Martinez had tried to become an actor before joining the police force. She had even auditioned for a small role in one of Eastwood's films 10 years ago, but didn't get the part. This information spread quickly online. People debated whether Martinez had a personal reason to want to embarrass Eastwood on national television. The police chief, Bill Rogers, announced that a full investigation into Martinez's conduct was underway. "If any officer acted improperly, there will be consequences," he promised. Through all of this, Clint Eastwood himself remained mostly silent. He stayed in his home, only leaving for meetings with his lawyers. Photographers tried to get pictures of him, but his security kept them away. His only public statement was the brief comment he had made after being released on bail. John found this interesting. Most celebrities would be giving interviews and trying to defend themselves publicly. But Eastwood was letting his lawyers and family speak for him. "Maybe he's just too old to deal with all this," Mike suggested when they talked on the phone. "Or maybe he's guilty and doesn't want to say something that could be used against him. Or maybe he just trusts the system to clear him," John said. "He's always played characters who don't talk much in his movies. Maybe he's like that in real life too." As the third week of the case began, the public's attention showed no signs of fading. If anything, interest grew stronger with each new development. John Miller, like millions of others across America, couldn't wait to see what would happen next in a real-life drama more compelling than any movie. 3 weeks after Clint Eastwood's arrest, the case that had gripped the nation began to take unexpected turns. John Miller was at work in the hardware store when he saw the breaking news alert on his phone. He quickly stepped into the break room to watch the store's small TV. On screen, George Smith, the former stunt double who had claimed to witness an argument between Eastwood and the missing Frank Collins, was being led into a police station in handcuffs. The news reporter explained that Smith was being charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. In a shocking development, the reporter said, "George Smith has admitted that he fabricated his story about seeing Clint Eastwood threaten Frank Collins." According to police, Smith confessed that he made up the story hoping to get money from tabloid newspapers and TV interviews. John couldn't believe what he was hearing. Smith's testimony had seemed so convincing. It had been a major piece of evidence against Eastwood. When John got home that evening, he called Lisa, his neighbor, who had been researching the case with him. "Did you see the news about Smith?" he asked. "Yes," Lisa replied. I just finished watching his lawyer's statement. Smith apparently tried to sell his story to several news outlets before going public. He was asking for $50,000. So he was just doing it for money, John said, shaking his head. I wonder how many other witnesses might be lying. Next day, more cracks in the case appeared. The forensic evidence that supposedly tied Eastwood to Collins' disappearance was being questioned. The prosecution had claimed they found a DNA match between a hair found in Collins' apartment and Eastwood. But an independent lab hired by Eastwood's defense team found serious problems with the testing. Dr. Ellen Ross, a respected forensic scientist, explained the issues in a press conference. The sample was improperly stored for decades, she said. Contamination is almost certain. Also, the testing methods used by the prosecution's lab do not meet current scientific standards. Their results are simply not reliable. District Attorney Richard Bell tried to defend the evidence. We stand by our forensic team, he said firmly. This is just an attempt by Mr. Eastwood's expensive lawyers to confuse the public. But his words had less impact now. People were starting to doubt the case against the famous actor and director, John's boss at the hardware store. A man named Carl, who rarely talked about anything but tools and home repairs, even mentioned the case. Looks like they rushed too. Judgment, Carl said as they stocked shelves. Wanted to make a big splash by arresting a celebrity. On Wednesday of that week, a local news station got hold of emails between District Attorney Bell and the police chief. The emails showed that Bell had pushed for Eastwood's arrest before the forensic testing was complete. In one email, Bell wrote, "This will be huge for public attention. We need to move quickly." The emails made many people angry. It looked like Bell had rushed the case for publicity rather than waiting to build solid evidence. Paul White, Eastwood's lawyer, held yet another press conference. He stood tall at the podium, looking more confident than ever. "These emails confirm what we've said from the beginning," he declared. "This case was rushed for publicity and political gain. My client has been put through a public nightmare based on flimsy evidence and testimony from a confessed liar." Reporters shouted questions, but White held up his hand. "There's more," he said. "We have filed a motion to dismiss all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct. District Attorney Bell violated proper procedures at every step of this investigation." As pressure mounted on Bell, another unexpected thing happened. A librarian from Oregon named Karen Wilson contacted Eastwood's defense team. She had been watching the case on TV and remembered something from her work archiving old newspapers. Wilson had found a small article from a local California paper dated July 3, 1972, 3 weeks after Frank Collins had supposedly disappeared. The article mentioned Collins being interviewed about a different film project in San Francisco. If Collins was alive and giving interviews 3 weeks after he supposedly disappeared, then no crime had been committed at all. Eastwood's lawyers quickly obtained the newspaper and presented it to the judge. As the headline read, "Local film professionals discuss new independent project." A photo showed several people, including a young man identified in the caption as Frank Collins, production assistant. The discovery caused an uproar. Had the police and district attorney failed to do even basic research? Or had they ignored evidence that didn't fit their case? A reporter tracked down the photographer who took the picture. The elderly man, now living in a retirement home, confirmed that he remembered the interview. "Sure, I remember that day," he said. "There were about 5 or 6 film people talking about making a low-budget movie in the Bay Area. One of them was a young fellow named Collins. Seemed nice enough." District Attorney Bell tried to suggest the photo might not actually be Collins, or that the date of the newspaper might be wrong. But few people believed him now. His credibility was severely damaged. John and Lisa spent an evening looking at all the new information online. They spread their notes across John's kitchen table. "It's falling apart," Lisa said, "the whole case. They didn't even check if Collins was really missing. I wonder what really happened to him." John said, "If he was alive in July 1972, where did he go after that? Is he still alive somewhere?" They didn't have answers yet, but clearly the story was more complicated than anyone had first thought. The judge in the case, Hilan Garcia, ordered an emergency hearing to review all the new evidence. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators. Eastwood sat quietly at the defense table, his face showing little emotion. Judge Garcia was clearly not happy. She questioned the district attorney. Sharply, "Mr. Bell, how do you explain the newspaper article showing Mr. Collins alive weeks after you claim he disappeared?" Bell shuffled papers nervously. "Your Honor, we are still verifying the authenticity of that article. And even if Mr. Collins was alive in July, it doesn't rule out foul play later." The judge frowned. "And the emails showing you rushed this case? The witness who admitted to lying? The questionable forensic evidence? How do you explain all of that?" Bell had no good answers. By the end of the hearing, it was clear which way things were going. That evening, as John watched the news coverage of the hearing, the reporter said what everyone was thinking. Sources close to the case say all charges against Clint Eastwood may be dropped as early as tomorrow. The case that had started with a shocking arrest on live television was collapsing just as publicly. Millions of people who had watched Eastwood being handcuffed now watched as his name was being cleared. John felt strangely satisfied. He had followed the case so closely, and somehow it felt right that the truth was coming out. Still, questions remained. If Collins hadn't disappeared because of Eastwood, what had happened to him, and who would be held responsible for the rush to judgment that had put an innocent man through such a public ordeal? The answers would soon come, as the final chapter of this real-life drama prepared to unfold. 45 days after Clint Eastwood's shocking arrest on live television, the case came to its final conclusion. John Miller sat in his living room, once again watching Airthum. The network had announced that Eastwood would return to the same show where he had been arrested. For 22 million people tuned in, even more than had seen the original arrest. Susan Green, the host who had witnessed Eastwood being handcuffed, looked nervous as the show began. "Tonight, we welcome back a man who needs no introduction," she said. 6 weeks ago, viewers watched as he was arrested on this very set. Today, all charges against him have been dropped. Please welcome Clint Eastwood. The famous actor walked onto the set. He looked calm and moved with the same quiet dignity he showed in his films. The audience stood and clapped for nearly 2 minutes. Eastwood raised his hand in a small wave, then sat down across from Susan. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for coming back," Susan said when the applause finally died down. "I want to apologize for what happened during your last visit." Eastwood nodded. "No need to apologize. You didn't know it was going to happen. The charges against you were dismissed by Judge Helen Garcia 5 days ago," Susan said. She was quite harsh in her ruling. "Can you tell us about that day in court?" Eastwood leaned back slightly in his chair. "The judge saw what most people eventually saw," he said in his famous raspy voice. "The case was built on bad evidence and worse intentions. She called it a reckless disregard for proper procedure and said, I had been subjected to public humiliation. Without substantial evidence, Susan asked how he felt about what had happened. Many people expected Eastwood to express anger or bitterness. Instead, he spoke calmly. The system makes mistakes, he said, but eventually, truth wins out. I'm just glad it didn't take years, as it does for some innocent people. John watched. With interest, Eastwood seemed so different from most celebrities. He didn't show rage or demand sympathy. He just stated facts in a straightforward way. On screen, Stazan asked about the missing production assistant, Frank Collins. What do you think happened to him after he was seen in San Francisco in July 1972? I don't know, Eastwood admitted. The police are looking into that now. It seems he changed his name and moved to Canada later that year. They're trying to find out if he's still alive. The interview continued for half an hour. Eastwood answered questions directly, but never raised his voice or showed strong emotion. At the end, Susan asked if he planned to take legal action against those who had wrongfully accused him. I haven't decided, Eastwood said. But I'm more interested in moving forward than looking back. After the interview ended, John switched to a news channel to see the reaction. The fallout from the case was significant. District Attorney Richard Bell had resigned in disgrace earlier that week. His emails pushing for a rushed arrest had destroyed his career. His replacement, a woman named Diane Vargas, promised to review all of Bell's cases for similar misconduct. Officer Judy Martinez and two of her colleagues had been fired from the police force for their role in the planned television arrest. Police chief had also stepped down, though he claimed it was for unrelated health reasons. The executives at Airthum faced questions about their ethical standards. A congressional committee was looking into whether they had violated broadcasting rules by planning to show an arrest without telling viewers it was staged. The network's stock price had dropped significantly. John's phone rang. It was Lisa. "Did you watch the interview?" she asked. "Just finished," John replied. "What did you think?" "He was so calm," Lisa said. "If it was me, I'd be furious." "Why, he's Clint Eastwood," John said with a laugh. "Always cool under pressure." The next morning, John stopped at a coffee shop before work. People at every table were talking about the interview. Newspaper on the counter had the headline, "Eastwood speaks. Truth wins out." At the hardware store, even Carl had more to say than usual. "Shame what they put that man through," he said as he and John unloaded a truck. "Good thing he had the money for good lawyers. Regular folks might not have been so lucky." John nodded. "Makes you wonder how many innocent people are in jail because they couldn't fight back like he did." A week later, Eastwood made another announcement that surprised everyone. He would be directing a new film, a courtroom drama about false accusations and media frenzy. The movie would tell the story of an ordinary person wrongfully accused of a crime and how their life was affected by sudden public attention. "Sometimes life gives you material too good to ignore," Eastwood told interviewer Bill Taylor with a hint of a smile. It was his first joke since the ordeal began. The public, which had been divided at first, now largely supported Eastwood. His ordeal had sparked national conversations about several important issues: how the justice system worked, how media covered accusations, and how quickly people jumped to conclusions without evidence. Some good did come from the case. Several states began reviewing how arrests were conducted, especially in high-profile cases. New guidelines were created to prevent arrests from being staged for television. And a scholarship was established in Frank Collins, named for young people interested in film production. As for Frank Collins himself, investigators eventually found that he had moved to Vancouver in late 1972 and changed his name to Frank Carson. He had worked on Canadian films for several years before opening a small camera shop. He had died of natural causes in 2012, never knowing that his disappearance would one day lead to such drama. Officer Martinez gave a television interview after being fired. She admitted that she had wanted to embarrass Eastwood because he hadn't. "Cast her in a film years ago. I let personal feelings affect my job," she said. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." George Smith, who had lied about seeing an argument between Eastwood and Collins, was sentenced to 6 months in jail for perjury. The judge said she wanted to send a message that lying in important cases had serious consequences. John Miller eventually put away his notebook about the case. Life returned to normal, and other news stories took over the headlines. But he and millions of others would never forget the sight of Clint Eastwood being handcuffed on live television, or how the truth had finally come out. 6 months later, John was at the movies with Lisa, who had become more than just a neighbor during their time investigating the case together. They were watching Eastwood's new film, which critics were calling one of his best. "Do you think he would have made this movie if he hadn't been arrested?" Lisa whispered. John shook his head. "Probably not. It's strange how something so bad turned into something good." On screen, an innocent man was fighting to clear his name. But unlike in real life, the audience already knew how the story would end. John smiled in the darkness of the theater. The real story had been much more unpredictable and, in some ways, more interesting than anything Hollywood could create.